Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Emily and Jamie,
Mm-hmm.
and we're doing a little ep on daylight savings.
App.
Little ep.
That new
Just
lingo?
making sure
Yeah.
Jamie's paying attention over here. We haven't really spoken much yet today, so just seeing you
It's
there.
just new lingo for your.
I'm hip. I'm
Make
with
us-
it.
yeah.
Okay, so
No,
there's
that's-
two.
I don't know if that's what that is.
Austin Powers, Dr. Evil. Okay, let's keep
App?
going.
No, I'm talking about the app.
Episode.
No. I know what you mean. I just don't think that's hip and cool.
Now that I have everyone's attention. So there's two types of people out there. I think there's only two, right? The people that prepare for daylight savings and they're like, oh my God, it's coming. What can we do?
Asking us for tips like 3 weeks
ago. 3 weeks ago. We were like, we'll get to that. So this episode is airing 1 week before daylight savings for those who would like to prepare. And then there's the other people out there that sort of are probably more in line with our style, and you don't do anything about daylight savings. You wing it and you just go right into it and then you figure it out after.
Yeah.
So we thought we would address both types.
Yeah.
Now, contrast to previous years, I was thinking about,
I'm dying to know where this is
I know,
going.
I was thinking about not winging it as much this year because Grace and Maddie are easier for me to wing it with. Like I can keep them up later one night and then they'll sleep in a little bit later and I can just kind of like smooth them over after the fact. But Eloise is an early morning riser and always has been. And I finally just got her to wake up in the 6s. So I'm actually not looking forward to daylight savings because I feel like we're just going to be back in the 5s again. So I have been slowly creeping her bedtime up by like 5 to 10 minutes every night. And I've gotten her from a 7:15, 7:30 bedtime to like an 8 o'clock, 8:15 bedtime.
What time should
I don't think it's going to work though, because she's getting up around 6:30 still.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I'm trying. I was trying.
I feel like I've had a totally different experience with my kids where the younger they were, the easier daylight savings always was. And as they've gotten, like I felt, especially as babies, like I feel like if you have a kid 6 months and younger, daylight savings like doesn't tend to be as big of a deal. Like
totally,
they'll adjust, usually within the week following daylight savings. Obviously, that's not every kid. But I think that daylight savings this year is going to be an absolute fucking shit show in my house. And it doesn't matter how much I prep for it or not.
I do feel though your kids like to get up and serve themselves mini muffins.
I just don't want them. I don't want them serving themselves mini muffins at 5 a.m.
5 a.m. mini muffins.
No, they don't want that. I do feel like it's important to mention that this is the last fallback we're going to have to deal with because daylight savings is gone next year.
I know.
So we have the fallback and then they're doing the spring forward and then it's gone.
So are we doing the spring forward? Because somebody asked me about that over the weekend and I actually wasn't sure. And I don't want to stay in the fallback time. I like the spring forward time.
We're doing the spring forward.
I love that though. I like when it's light out in the evening. Yeah. I like to rock a later bedtime.
Hopefully I'm not misinforming people.
I hope we're correct.
But which also just make any sense, then just don't do the fucking fallback right now and screw everybody, but that's fine.
Right. Why? Anyway, yeah. Why actually are we doing that?
I'm sure that it has to do with deciding to do it in
political factors and things.
But the fallback is usually what really screws you as parents. This is the worst one, not the spring ahead, typically. And that is usually because of the early wake up.
Someone who was a non-parent just said to me the other day, well,
you don't need to post about this. You're gaining an hour.
And I was like, no, let me clarify for you.
No, this is the worst fit. So
parents aren't gaining shit here. Non-parents fallback is pretty awesome.
Yeah, good,
right? Extra hour of sleep.
Unless you work the night shift and then you have to work an extra hour.
Oh my gosh, we used to have to on labor and delivery. There was this old clock on the nursing station.
Take it off
and yep, you have to stand up on a chair, take it down off the wall, and slowly turn the clock back 1 hour and work 13 hours instead of 12. Yeah, it's a long night.
Yep. It's usually when most of the antics that we got in trouble for happened during the 13-hour shift.
Always.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's provide some useful tips here.
regardless of your child's age, I will say, I do think that, you know, there's a sweet spot with them being younger, but like, regardless of their child's age, why don't we start with the week of, and then we'll still give people the tips for like, if you do it a few days or the day of daylight savings time or after.
Yeah.
So this is, you know, we're talking about this episode is intentionally launching the week of daylight savings. Things that you can do leading up. So daylight savings is going to happen on Saturday night. Okay. The clocks will go back an hour in the middle of the night. And what the issue with daylight savings is that it could cause your child to then wake up an hour earlier, right? Because they're not going to all of a sudden sleep 13 hours if they were sleeping 12.
Right.
They're not going to all of a sudden sleep 12 hours if they were sleeping 11.
Unless you tell them before.
Right.
Just gently whisper in their ear, tomorrow,
13 hours.
one more hour.
Yeah.
That sometimes works.
And so leading up to this week, what you can do is you want to make their naps and or bedtime, if they're napping, include the naps. If they're like my kids and not napping, then it's just bedtime. You want to make bedtime and naps later, right? So that your whole schedule gets pushed back, so that when the clocks fall back, you land back on your previous schedule, right? So I would do, like, if you're listening to this on Monday, you can, I mean, it really doesn't matter, right? But any day that you're listening to this, I would shoot for maybe like 10 minutes.
Right.
So if your kid normally naps at 1 on Monday, put them down at 1:10. They normally go to bed at 7. At bedtime, put them down at 7:10. Tuesday, 1:20, 7:20. Wednesday, 1:30, 7:30. Thursday, and so on and so forth, until you land on 2 p.m. nap, 8 p.m. bedtime. On Saturday, daylight savings pushes everything back. On Sunday, you'll have a 1 p.m. bedtime and a 1 p.m. nap and a 7 p.m. bedtime again.
Right where you left off.
Right?
Right.
Makes sense.
I think that's very helpful for the babies that are in like the 6 months to 2 year zone, because they really respond well to, the ones that are still crushing naps, they respond well to the slow little adjustments versus just making that big giant jump.
Right. And same thing, if you have more than one nap, you do the same thing for all of the naps. If you have no naps, then you're just doing it at bedtime. What you shouldn't expect, and you already alluded to this, is like for your kid to all of a sudden start sleeping later in the morning necessarily. Right. Like you might push bedtime back to, just using my example, 8 p.m. And where before you were putting them to bed at 7 and they were waking up at 6, you might push their bedtime to 8 p.m. and they still wake up at 6.
Right.
It can take time for some kids. It's a few days to adjust. I would say that's more of like the younger kids, but not necessarily. And for other kids, it can really take 3 or 4 weeks for them to adjust. Like I'm telling you that I'm going into this daylight savings. Like I have started to push back the girls' bedtime a little bit.
I'm gonna give it till Christmas.
Yeah, but like
I'm Christmas over here.
Going into that, this knowing that like my kids are pretty confident that my kids are going to be waking up in the 5s for a while.
Yep.
And I'm just going to have to leave a light on in the family room for them to fend for themselves.
That is the biggest question though that parents have been asking me in advance of this, is sort of like, okay, let's say they are now getting up at 5 instead of 6. You usually advise at naps to not go in before 6 a.m. This would be a case where I would actually have to just start my day though, because they don't understand that there's an entire hour gone. To an extent, right?
I mean, like, who are you talking about? What child? Eloise?
Of my family?
Yeah.
I mean, okay. So anybody out there, right, that has a baby that wakes up before 6 a.m.
So I just want to clarify though, if you have a kid who's still in a crib, I'm just asking what you would do, because if I had a kid who's still in the crib and not sharing a room with a sibling,
right,
I would leave them in their crib until 6 a.m.
Right. I'm talking about the parents who are like, they're up, they're standing, they're screaming, they're wide awake, they're ready to start their day.
Yeah, it's still,
and it's 5:30. Screaming?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. Well, sometimes I'm like, just fuck it, just get up at that point. Who cares?
They're I mean, if I had a kid,
like to leave them as long as possible, but
I want to be clear on the scenario here. If I had a child, which I do not have a child like this, but if I had a child who was still in a crib in a room by themselves.
Right. You're saying in a room by themselves, because we'll get to me in a sec.
Well, I'm saying in a room by myself because Camilla's still in a crib, but she shares a room with Kate, and Camilla can get herself out of the crib. But I would leave that child in their room, in their crib until 6.
Mm-hmm.
100%. I would turn off the monitor and leave them.
Right.
So
I'm giving permission to go grab one.
I'm not saying
if
that you
need
can't
to.
do what Emily's telling you to do. I'm just saying I would actually still, because the point being is where before they were sleeping 11 hours, now they're still only sleeping 10.
Right.
It's the same exact thing. It's the same exact scenario that if you have a kid who you're trying to sleep train to sleep later,
Yeah.
eventually you're just going to leave that kid in the crib until 6 a.m.
That's true.
Okay.
It's true.
Now,
Eloise goes, Ma!
yeah.
Ma!
Well, and she also is in a room with two of
She's
the
in a
other
room
kids.
with Grace and Maddie. So
Right.
if I leave her squawking long enough, she wakes
Right.
them up.
Right.
It's a whole predicament.
Right.
So
So I'm not saying that you can't go in there maybe initially.
initially, you have to
With-
cut it eventually.
Right. With
I
the
agree.
hopes that like they
Cut the
will just
cord.
start sleeping later. Right.
Totally.
But like I definitely wouldn't go in and get them at 5 or 5:30 in the morning for longer than like 5 to 7 days. They either start sleeping later or they don't, and you have to help them sleep later.
Then you end up kind of sleep training in the morning again.
Yeah.
Totally. Hoping for not.
That's what I would do. But to each their own, right? And then there's the like really this is, I don't know, I feel like daylight savings, and I think maybe you're in a slightly different camp, but I feel like daylight savings really can screw up the older kids. And it's the older kids that are not tired at bedtime because you're trying to put them to bed at 7:30 like you usually do, but it really still feels like 6:30. And or waking up, if they usually were waking up at 6:30, waking up in the 5s. And
this will bite me in the ass, I'm sure. I have noticed as of late that if I leave Grace and Maddie up later, they're starting to sleep in later, which is new. Normally, if they were up later, they get up earlier.
My kids do not do that.
But those will be my final last words for sure.
My kids still, no matter how late
eat those words later.
They wake up at the same time or earlier the next morning, and they are
fucking miserable. It used to be the later Grace got up, the earlier she got up. Maddie loves sleeping now, so she'll love a fallback.
Yeah. I mean, now, if you wait until the day of daylight savings, right, like Saturday, you're like, fuck, haven't done anything.
Yeah, you're just like in induced panic all week. Like, should I do anything? Oh my God, I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah. Then my recommendation would be just try and push any naps and or bedtime as far back as you can get away with without it turning into a total disaster. But have the same expectation as what we were just talking about.
Right.
If you put your kid to bed earlier, if you put your kid to bed later right now and they wake up earlier, then expect that for the morning of daylight savings. Don't think that you can push your kid's bedtime to 8 o'clock when they normally go to bed at 7. And because of daylight savings, they're just like all of a sudden and they normally wake up at 6. They might wake up at 4:30.
Right.
Because it's daylight savings plus a late bedtime that causes them to wake up early anyway. So just have realistic expectations.
Totally. And the only realistic expectation that I can think you could walk away from this with is literally you need to give it 3 weeks. Yeah. At least 3 weeks.
Yeah.
If it's quicker than that, great. Good for you. Good for your kid if they roll right into it. But if you are stressing a week or two out of the gates of daylight saving and you're still like not back at your regular bedtime and wake up, just take a deep breath and be like, it was a big change for that kid.
Yep.
And it's a big deal, an hour.
Yep.
It's a big change and they don't get it. And it's just going to take a little bit of time. I think, especially with the toddlers.
Yeah.
And the preschool kids.
Yep.
The babies, again, I don't know, call it less than a year. They're pretty flexible. Yeah. I think.
Agreed.
It's the toddlers and the preschool kids that usually need more time.
Yeah. And then there's this, there's a scenario obviously this week leading up to it. You're going to push bedtime and or naps back, call it 10 minutes every day. There's a scenario of like the day of where even if you just push everything back a half hour, 45 minutes, hour, great.
Yep.
And then the scenario of like, you just did nothing. You did your day as normal on Saturday, which is essentially the same as like trying to push things back on Saturday, right? Like you're going to end up with the same result. Then you just do the same thing following daylight savings, right? So now their schedule has shifted from maybe it was 7 to 7 and now it's 6 to 6. So start on Sunday with 6:10 and try and push bedtime back 10 minutes.
Yep.
Right? Monday, 6:20, Tuesday, 6:30. Try and gradually shift the schedule back throughout the week following daylight savings. Then you're eventually going to land on whatever day it is, Thursday or Friday, the 7 to 7 schedule again, or at least the 7 p.m. bedtime. They might still be waking up at 6 a.m., right? And then give that, once you've adjusted the schedule, that's really when you still have to give it the 3 weeks.
Right.
Like once the schedule's been fully adjusted. So you can do it the week ahead and great. You're 1 week into the 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You can do it the week after. That'll start your one. It doesn't, but either way, it can take time.
I have another tip.
Oh, this should be good.
You could also
go on vacation and leave your children with a family member for 1 to 2 weeks.
Yes, that was it. Fly to Europe.
Yeah.
There are some people listening that truly will never change bedtime or wake up, even with daylight savings. Like they have a winter and a summer bedtime and wake up.
Okay.
Right. So like maybe you are a 7:30 to 7:30 person. And then when you enter the winter time, it just all of a sudden becomes 6:30 to 6:30. And that parent gets up at 6:30 for the day and they rock the earlier bedtime. And then later in the year, when we spring forward to summer, they just let the clocks change and do a 7:30 to 7:30. And they have a later bedtime because it's light out in the evening. And they literally just don't even acknowledge the time change.
Right.
Like with their child,
right.
just on the clock.
Right. Do that now.
It depends on what time your bedtime is. Like if you're talking about a 5 a.m. wake up versus a 6 to 7 a.m. wake up,
right.
that could be a big deal.
Yeah.
But maybe you are in that 6:30 a.m. to 8 o'clock a.m. wake up and you actually just don't do anything at all.
Yeah.
You just change the clocks.
Yep.
Kid has no idea.
Correct. Okay.
Cool.
So,
or you can go away and leave your kids with a family member.
Don't stress. It's going to be fine.
This isn't a big deal.
Might be some early wake ups for a while.
Yeah.
It's managing your expectations, expect it. And when it happens, you at least expect it and are prepared. And if it doesn't, you get to pat yourself on the fucking back that it's not what happened, right? But manage your expectations, know how you're going to handle it. If things go the way that you're expecting, which the expectation is really, really low, and then give it time. Okay? It's going to be okay.
Okay.
We'll let you know how it goes in our household.
Set your coffee up the night before.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Set out the mini muffins on the couch for your children to open on their own the night before. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.